Jagan Reddy, I'm the founder, CEO at RightRev. Prior to this, I also founded RevPro as a product. It's now owned by another company. I exited that back in 2017. But where all this idea came from, how we created the space. I'm an accountant um, from education perspective, and then I pivoted into tech. So I kind of hold the dual side of the coin, and I've been working in the office of the CFO from day one of my career. So I've always been serving the CFO, and I was with Juniper Networks, helping ERP implementation, and in mid of everything, there was a need where Juniper's business model was shifting from selling high value big boxes to low value small boxes. And the model they were selling also changed because they started selling through channel a lot more. And now everything changes. Your pricing, how you price changes, how you sell changes, how you invoice changes, and then your revenue recognition changes. So completely everything was changing. And I was tasked to go find something that can automate the complexity in the revenue recognition. And I look into the market. This is back in 2003, and there was nobody in the market, and ERPs were literally doing bare minimum. Even today, they're bare minimum. There's nothing more there. It was bare minimum, and there was nothing out in the market. And we ended up basically building our own custom solution in house. And that made me quickly ask a question: what is other companies doing? Being in the valley, it's a great advantage. I got connected to several technology companies, revenue teams, and I go visit everybody and ask them like, "What do you do for RevRec?" Spreadsheet. It was spreadsheet everywhere. ERPs, they get the transaction, they don't do anything. It all goes down to spreadsheet, and that's when I thought like, we have to build something for for this community. Why can't we create the space? And that's where RevPro came into play. 2009, we started RevPro. Our first customer was Brocade Communication, a public company, $2 billion company, and they were changing the accounting. 2009 is when a new accounting standard came in, which is EITF 081, which was primarily for the tech industry, and how you recognize revenue, how you allocate, and all that was changing. And I was the only one who had a software that can do this, and that's where the RevPro came into play.
Yeah, so right around that time, I was on the other side. I was at a public company and I owned pricing and packaging strategy. It was a company called Responses, and we were pricing and packaging everything. We had usage, we had tiers, we had bundles, a lot of the stuff that's happening today, ironically. And I remember our accounting team was freaking out. All right, we're going to build a homegrown system here for our RevRec because we know the laws were dropping, and RevPro to the rescue. So I was part of the team that rebuilt our SKU structure, our product catalog, so that we could implement RevPro. And JC Poussin, who we were talking about at the time, he was the accountant. Every day I was like, thank God, let's work on this implementation. And then we partnered again at Zora, helped with RevPro there. And here we are for our third round with RightRev, as things are changing in the monetization world. Um, so tell us about Salesforce, right? So then after that, and most recently, Salesforce then approached you and asked you to build another revenue recognition tool for their revenue cloud. Can you tell us about that?
Um, it was so amazing feeling today. I'm standing there watching the keynote, and and the great leader Mark Benioff is talking about Salesforce and how they are transforming everything. I'm sitting there and talking. This is the big giant software company, and I've been known in the ecosystem very well. And when I left Zora, I sold RevPro to Zora, and then I left Zora, and Salesforce was doing this revenue cloud, CPQ, billing, all of that, and the last mile of the entire process with the revenue recognition, and they needed something to do it. And that's when the story started. Like, people knew that I left Zora, and there's an opportunity there. So when I talked to Salesforce, we clearly saw there's a huge gap on the ecosystem to complete the last mile. um, I know I talk about last mile, but I'll come back to it. It's not the last mile. We are part of every mile of the code to revenue, so we'll talk about it. That's where the partnership started. Like, Salesforce basically said, "Why didn't you come in, build it on the ecosystem? Let's go to market." And Salesforce is one of the strategic investor, and we have been partnered with them for 5 years, and amazingly helping our customers in this ecosystem.
I love that story. So let's talk about your quote to cash process to revenue process. When we think about this, pricing and packaging, that's how you open up customer wallets, right? That's how customers want to pay and buy your products. I would say that's one of your anchors of this process. And then the other anchors on the other end, that's your revenue recognition, because this is what you report to Wall Street. It's what you report to your investors, whether they're private equity owned, VC owned, and your employees. It's how sales people get comped. Your employees own equity in your company. So these are really the anchors. And Jog and I were sharing war stories. When you don't get that process right between your pricing and packaging all the way down to your RevRec, a lot of things fall apart in the gap. You leave revenue on the table. You've got revenue leakage. Jogging, do you have kind of a war story you want to share with us when
I
that's
mean,
not done right?
so I'll talk about more of a generic story, what we hear everywhere, right? When you talk to any sales rep and you ask them like, how do you sell? The first thing, like many times you'll hear, our hands are handcuffed, like we can go discount more than X, we cannot sell more than this, we cannot bundle this, we cannot bundle that product. There's a lot of rules around it, like how you can sell, how you can price and package and sell. And guess where all this is coming from? This is coming from the revenue team, because they don't want the sales team to sell anything they want and however they want, and then finally end up not getting proper revenue in the books, right? You'll get cash, you'll get paid through your billing and everything that will happen, but what gets recorded in your revenue is going to be a nightmare, because CFO might think, I have a great example. Anyway, you asked me, now I remember example. This is one tech company. They run almost their books to the last minute of the quarter. They're watching like every dollar coming in to meet their forecast and the revenue number they commit to the Wall Street. The CFO is sitting and staring at a screen and asking people forecast what's coming. There's a $20 million deal booked, and the sales team is saying we're getting 20 million. So CFO said like, 20 million, great. So I'm going to hit my number. I'm all happy. Next day they close the books and then he looks at the number, half the revenue is cut off. Like they only got 10 million, and the CFO literally panicked and said like, what happened? Did we sell half the deal or what happened? It ended up they did sell 20 million, but the timing of the rev rec was super different. So he cannot recognize all the 20 million upfront, and he didn't get the enough value. And that prompted the CFO at that point to say, I want especially the forecast to come from a revenue tool, not from a coding tool or the pipeline. That's not good enough. Don't give me a forecast from a raw pipeline. I need that to be run in the revenue tool to say how much revenue we can check. So that's a great example.
Yeah, that's so important. When you think about where your revenue is going to end up in that anchor, I've got a war story too. I was working at a F100 big public company, and we had closed a $10 million deal. Sales is celebrating, the emails going through the company. And I looked at that, and that $10 million deal cost the company 12 million, 2 million in revenue leakage. Um, Pretty quickly, email from the president of the company landed in my inbox. We're cutting this product line. It's not profitable. We don't want it. And I looked at it, and I was kind of product marketing and pricing at the same time. And I said, no, this is what the C suite wants. We absolutely need this product. We can't cut it. It's not a product problem. This is a systems problem. And there was revenue leakage because we don't have the guardrails with our systems. So after that, they assigned me a whole engineering scrum team. And what we did is we had to rebuild how we track usage in the product. We had to redo the contracts, the invoices, the billing, all the way down to RevRec. And the first person on my speed dial was RevRec. Let's figure out how we want to do RevRec. How do we want to port that revenue? And then let's figure out the bridge to get there. How do we go and build our systems to make sure we never have it? And you sometimes you can't trust deal desk, your executives. They're going to give discounts that they want. They want to close that big logo. But when you have the systems in place, we never had revenue leakage again. That product, every single time it was sold, we were always in the positive. It was always profitable. And actually, some of the engineers I worked with filed for patents. So a lot to unlock here on the system side. Um, so Jagan, when we talk about ASC 606 and right revenue recognition as the anchor, I almost want you to think of it as, you've got the 6 steps of ASC 606, but think of revenue recognition as the bottom. It is ingesting all the upstream data. And when we were talking last night, you were saying when you bring in all that data from your pricing, your packaging, your quoting, your invoice, your billing, all the way down to your RevRec, you can actually see the health of a business. So tell us more about that.
So whenever I meet a customer and we talk about revenue recognition tool. And like today, Mark Benioff was talking about AI is no good if you have a bad data. Your data is like super important for AI to work. But guess what? Data is important for any downstream systems, right? Like reporting. It has been always an issue with data. Data is super important. And when I talk to a customer, they ask like, how long do you think this will take to implement? What it takes to keep the system up and running? And my first question is, how good is your data, right? And I've heard over and over say like, we have the best process, we have the best data out there. And I always tell customer, you send all the data to a revenue recognition tool, and the tool will tell you how good is your data. Because when we build a pro or even the RightRev, our basic foundation layer, the data layer, has so much validations built in. Like we don't let any bad data come in because it'll mess up every accounting there. You're going to report wrong numbers. So we have an amazing guardrail that says like we check every data point and we say it's a bad data. We're pushing data back out. So I will say the revenue recognition tool, half of them is more of a data layer than the engine itself. The engine is the 50%, but everything else we do is like data checkpoints, how good is the data, anything wrong with your upstream processes. We kind of surface everything back to the users so they can see what's happening. So uh, that's what our customers always find whenever they implement RevRec. They find, oh, I never knew I had a gap in the process here. They go back and fix the processes to make it work.
Yeah, I mean, it's powerful. It can tell you so much. So I want to dig a little bit deeper into RevRec and why it's so complex. I know there's a lot of tools out there that are rolling out where they, oh, we can do RevRec. We can't. Now there are different levels of RevRec, and it can get very complex very fast, especially if you want to price and package for how your customers want to buy. You heard Benioff today talk about their agents. It's like we're changing our pricing. We're pricing to how people want to purchase our products. And so when you start going downstream, tell us about why revenue recognition can get complex. What are the different levels of complexity?
Um, there's always we classify customers under two categories. Either somebody has a simple RevRec needs or it's complex. There's nothing in between. And when you look at your customers, 99.9%, I'll say, or even you can add more nines to it, they all fall into complex. There's nothing like simple. The simple can be retail business, right? Like retail, they sell something off the shelf, they take the revenue. Even there's complexity because they have to account for returns happening. You sell 10 million worth of goods, you're not going to take 10 million. You have to keep some reserve for the returns because you allow returns. So even there's a lot of complexity. But coming into the true complex world, in the true RevRec, true complex, there are several areas where you will see complexity. The number one that I see in everywhere is a contract modification. Contract modification, because today's customer needs flexibility. They need flexibility to change how they use your product and how they buy your products. They need cancellation, easy cancellation, get out of the contract. They want to upgrade easily, all that. Every time a contract modification happens, the entire RevRec goes through a change. And the RevRec can change prospectively, or it can go and change all the way from the beginning. You reverse everything and recalculate everything. So there's two ways you can make a change on the RevRec side. And the second layer comes in is with when you have multiple products, you're bundling multiple products, the way you discount each product, if you're having a non-standard discounts, like product A, you discount 40%, product C, you give free of cost. Everything creates complexity because now you cannot take revenue. What you sold is not your revenue. You have to reallocate all the revenue to different products and product lines. And then comes in the compliance piece because now you need to have reporting in place where how do you slice and dice your revenue? You have to produce a lot of documentation when you file it. So the compliance kicks in, and that's where the more complexity starts as well. Now, on top of all this, the new pricing and packaging, I don't know how many of you heard, the AI companies are literally trying a new pricing model every month, right? They are trying, so experimenting so many different pricing models. And when we work with these companies, they want a product to be supported as well, like the platform to support the different pricing models, how they monetize, how they want to recognize. It creates a lot of complexity. We are seeing that. And we're not ready for everything because there's so many experiments happening, and that's where we being very agile, trying to do things as fast as we can to support this models. So from a complexity perspective, different industry have different complexity. When you go into the consumption business model, how do you capture the usage data? How do you meter them? And then how do you tie that to the contract and rate them? It's super important, right? Rating becomes super complex because you have pricing at different tiers and everything. There's tiers for pricing, there's tiers for rating, metering as well. Like when you use 1 million units within a month, within a year, within a week, there's so many different variations. You have monthly commits. All this creates complexities. Now, all the different use cases that you see needs to be handled downstream by a RevRec tool. Billing, I'll say billing is much more simple than what we have seen on the RevRec side, but because billing is you use, you can invoice it. But when it comes into RevRec, you have commits. If you don't hit the commits, you need to still recognize. On the billing side, your billing cycle can be a quarterly billing cycle, but the RevRec has to happen monthly. We can't wait for billing to happen. Billing is no more tied to RevRec, so it's a complete different path you need to take. When you go into SaaS business models have complexities on contract modification. That's the biggest pain because it allows changes to contracts anytime you need. And I just want to quickly touch base on the new EU Act that came out. I don't know how many of you saw it. The new EU Act allows you to cancel the contract with 2 months' notice. You can get out of the contract. You can no more force customer to stay in a long-term contract. Now, in that case, you go when you buy a lot of SaaS software today, you get monthly pricing and you get annual pricing. You always see the annual pricing is much cheaper than the monthly pricing. So guess what? You selected annual, you got into a contract. Now, 4 months into it, you're saying I'm canceling. Do you think like the vendor is going to let you just walk away with 4 months as it is? They're going to recalculate everything on a monthly pricing, and they're going to refund only the remaining because you can fool the system by going into annual contract and canceling in between. Now, what happens to the rev rec in this case, right? What happened to the billing? You have to do ad hoc billing. So I can keep talking about complexities over and over. There's so many use cases.
Yeah, it's ever changing, and that was kind of a big theme today at Benioff's keynote as well. Is we got to be ready for change. You need these agile systems. I'll say on my end, the other anchor, the reason why we have all these different pricing and packaging strategies is customers are waking up overnight and they want to pay differently. Yes, the company wants different selling models, but I interview customers all the time. Willingness to pay. How do you want to buy? They want to open up their wallets, but they want to open up and pay how they want. And that's why when we give them all this flexibility, it's almost custom pricing. All of that complexity is inherited downstream in your RevRec systems. And I love a tool like RightRev because it gives me ultimate flexibility on how I want to do my pricing, my packaging, my contracts, and really serve up to customers and consumers like you on how you want to buy. I've worked with companies where I say, okay, I've talked to your customer. This is how they want to buy. Can we launch this? Yeah, we're gonna have to go do an RFP. We're gonna need to put in a RevRec system. We don't have one. But shouldn't you have the systems already so that when we change our pricing and packaging on the fly, the systems are ready to go? And so we don't want to go do an RFP every single time we change our pricing strategy because good practices are you're looking at your pricing and packaging multiple times a year to make sure you're capturing wallet share, staying ahead of the competition. Um, so I would love to talk about an example of a company you think that's actually doing this right, who is actually putting the systems in place, and if you can share their story with us.
Absolutely. Um, we have one of our flagship customer heavily into the consumption business model, a thought leader in this model, and when were getting into complex pricing, they were looking for complete revenue automation. One of their biggest challenge was contract modification in the consumption business, and they selected RightRev because we have the agility to build what is required in the consumption. This was like 4 years back. They were experimenting very heavily in the consumption business model, how to price and package. And we worked with them. They've been live for the last 4 years, but we work with them very closely. And we are the only one in the market today having a dedicated revenue engine for the consumption business model. So today, all the AI companies are moving down that direction. We have really empowered our customers in this space with building something very dedicated, focused on the consumption engine. Now, how things have been changing there. They've been using our system amazingly well. It's working great. We've automated everything. Millions of consumption data flows into our system every day to automate the RevRec. And then they're experimenting a lot of pricing changes. One of the biggest pricing changes so in the consumption model, they sell credits. So you can buy the credits, and it's like you go to Starbucks, you buy a gift card, and then you can use the gift card to buy a coffee or a food or any other drink, whatever you want, you can use it. Now, on your order and on the billing, you will see just one line item called gift card, or in their term, it's a credits that you get. But then when you use it for different services, that's where the usage data comes in, like for what these credits have been used, right? Now, when you get that, we were recognizing revenue really pointing out to what services are being used. So in the revenue, they can see the bifurcation of um, a customer bought 1 million worth of credits, but in that they've used it some for running for the compute side, some for storage, some for services, all that stuff. And this was going fine. And then one fine day, the sales team wakes up and says, customers are want to bring their own storage. They don't want to take storage from you. But then when they use that, they need more discounts on how you operate. Now you are really going down, providing discounts at the service level, not at the credits level anymore. That changes the whole dynamics of how you recognize revenue. Not sure how many of you know, there's a concept called standalone selling price, where you need to assign to your performance obligations, and you have to reallocate your revenue because you're now discounting at more at the service level and not at the credits level. And this is something very unique we have seen in the market, nobody's doing. But this company is a thought leader, and they clearly said a lot of companies are going to follow that. So we built the engine just to do all those calculations with our consumption engine. And today we see a lot of AI companies going down the same path. So that's where the complexity comes in, because of a lot of companies are experimenting different pricing. There's going to be a huge impact on the downstream systems. Even billing systems will go through a lot of changes because they are getting all the usage data that's getting attached to the rate card on your contract, and how that gets discounted and all that changes.
Now, you bring up some big trends that are happening right now in pricing and packaging is usage, consumption, outcome-based pricing, especially with a lot of these AI companies where you're buying a bucket tokens. And the thing with a lot of this pricing, there's a lot of cogs too. So when you're using AI, there's a lot of the GPU costs, the compute costs, right? You've got to pay NVIDIA, a lot of third-party costs in the back end. And so cogs are a big deal. It kind of reminds me 15 years ago when it was becoming a mobile-first world, I was doing mobile pricing, and it's very similar with mobile pricing, sending an SMS message, you've got your aggregators, you've got your telephone companies like AT&T, Vodafone, they're setting the telephony charges, and there's a lot of hard costs there as well. And we quickly learned that when you have high cogs, you've got to have the systems in place to make sure that there isn't that revenue leakage. And you've got to be able to package things like tokens, APIs, SMS messages for usage and consumption and track all of it. So a lot happening in the world, which is really exciting. We've seen this before 15 years ago when we rolled out mobile, and now it's kind of the same methodology, but it's AI outcomes and usage. So one thing I want to move on to now is compliance. So compliance has come and gone, right? Everyone knows ASC 606, IFRS 15, but now in this world of usage and AI, there's a different story, I feel like, when it comes to compliance. And it's really thinking about usage accuracy and your contract compliance. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
um, Compliance has always been there. You all use different systems. There is no one system fits everyone, right? Like everybody use different systems for different processes. Like you have a CPQ tool, you have a billing tool, and then the RevRec comes into play. There's a lot of data moving across all these different systems, and then now we got this usage data coming in a huge volume. Usages are like running into hundreds and millions of data now. How do you ensure there's compliance across all the systems? One is data reconciliation is becoming a big factor for the finance team to understand, is the data getting propagated to all the systems properly? That's number one. How do you validate and make sure, like, an order created here ended up in the billing system as well in the revenue recognition system? And anything that created in the billing, is it getting pushed out to your cash collection systems, and is it once again coming into the revenue system or not? So the overall, the data reconciliation is a big big topic for finance, especially to make sure everything is reconciled properly before they close the books. And that ensures one of the compliance. The second compliance is on the usage data we are seeing. How do you make sure usage data is getting rated properly? So you get millions of records and you can have a lot of tiers of pricing. Now, what systems do you have? Like the metering system is going to go attached to the contract and it's going to find the price, but how do you ensure it's doing the right thing? I think there the compliance comes in. What kind of, you ask the users to run a report on a millions of data, they'll have no idea to figure out what is right, what is not wrong. That's where we see AI coming into play a much more in a bigger way to help customers make sure the reconciliations are happening fine. And this is feeding into revenue once again. And at the end, when it comes into revenue, revenue is all about audit and compliance. It's the same process that kicks in. How do you ensure we received all the data? How did we ensure like we applied all the right rules and everything? So we are deploying the same AI today. We don't want users to spend more time in the system running 10 different reports to make sure all correct. Rather, we are deploying AI to surface all the problems. It's not like everything that we can fix on our own, but our intent right now is to surface the problem back to the user to take an action using AI.
Yeah, that's big. We can't underestimate that because when it comes to usage and consumption outcome based pricing, the customer wants to log into the product and see it. And that invoice and that bill has to match. And from a pricing point of view, we're doing volume based discounts. We're giving them different bundling, moving them through different tiers so that data is useful not only for the customer, but also people running pricing and packaging. Another area of compliance is really invoice alignment for financial compliance. Can you tell us more about that?
I mean, recently, one of our customers, they got all this usage data and they're feeding it into the billing system to invoice. The customer had a contract for $75 million, so they had enough consumption left out. The usage data just got duplicated 3 times, and that ended up drawing down the credit 3 times. So out of 75 million, just in a quarter, the customer lost like $9 million, and this customer gained 9 million in revenue, and there was no cross check made anywhere to see like how do you ensure like it's not duplicated. There is no unique record ID when you get the usage data. It's a usage data, it's like raw data coming in. And that's where we went and recommended certain uniqueness in the data that we can deploy. There's a concept, it's an old concept called checksum you can do on a record. It basically creates a checksum and says, is this a duplicate data or not? So we kind of put in all that to ensure the, you're not over recognizing something, you're not over billing your customer, you're not over consuming any data. So this becomes a huge compliance. It will impact billing because if the customer doesn't have any cross check, they're just going to keep accepting it. Today, we receive a lot of credit usage statements from our service providers. We can go every line item to line item and check everything. So it is a big responsibility for the vendors to make sure they have the right compliance for their customers.
Yeah, that's important to make sure you have the systems in check. It's really having those systems and those guardrails that are automated, so you don't have that human error that causes that revenue leakage. Another area of compliance is about revenue linkage and audit compliance. Can you talk to us about that?
um, Revenue leakage perspective, there are multiple areas about revenue leakage. One is about, we always talk about renewals, right? Like, are you going upfront and talking to your customers on renewals? How do you know when a renewal is coming up? How much you need to charge for your renewal? When you're not doing all this on time, we see a lot of revenue leakage happening. And second, there are certain rules set up by the users how and when to recognize revenue in the system. But then that's where we are deploying AI tools to recommend, is the customers doing the right revenue recognition policies, or they can change it to ensure they can capture more revenue. And that's based on what type of products and services they sell. And we see this with other customers. We are using all this knowledge to recommend what we can give it to our customers back on the revenue leakage perspective. um, the other area where we see is, if you talk to the salespeople, I think we talked about this, the sales team are allowed to only discount 20 to 30%, not more than that. And that rule is typically set few years back. It's not like set up every year. Like revenue team doesn't go and say, this year you can go discounts X% or not. They don't get notified that. But we, from the revenue tool perspective, we are constantly looking at the data and saying, you don't need to stick with the 20 to 30. You can go more discount. You're not breaking any compliance issues. You can allow your sales team to go below than that, because that will make you better competitive in the market. So those are the other areas where we are advising the sales team with our tools to say, you don't leave the money on the table. You have an option to go compete much better in the market.
Thank you. So those are kind of the new 3 areas of compliance that people have to think about. We'll love to wrap up this session around AI. AI right now is front and center, and everyone's figuring out how do I apply it to my applications. People are worried about safety, hallucination. Tell me about how you're thinking about AI.
So you're supposed to get $100 from me. I give you $99. Are you okay with that?
No.
Okay, great. So that's what happens to revenue. There is no less than 100% accuracy. Revenue team always demands it needs to be 100% accurate. That's what we have seen. Um, there will be a time where revenue teams will build some tolerance for some errors, but today it's not there. It's going to take a while for them to get there. But until then, we are deploying AI in such a way that we are not changing our rules-based engine at this point. Even if you see a lot of AI today, how it's being done, people are going back to the workflow based, rules based engine today, but they're layering AI one step on top of that to enable customers to surface the issues, to enable customers to take a lot of actionable insights into it. But it's not going down all the way into the automation layer of the AI. It is going to take some time. But that's where we are today. We're deploying our AI technologies into our application to enable in the day-to-day operations to help users to better achieve their day-to-day task in a much more efficient way. And when things get better, then we will deploy in our core engine. That's where we
I think you bring up a really important part here where when it comes to RevRec, it's rules based, it's very deterministic. It's not a probabilistic system. You need precision, you need 100% accuracy to be auditable. And I think I've seen some RevRec tools saying you don't need to be rules based. I would caution on those. Last question here, but when you think of AI, any frameworks on how people can think about applying AI to their processes and systems, especially as they think of their order to cash to revenue process?
that's a great question, actually. In fact, um, I know what it is, but today I hear Mark Benioff talk about the same thing. They have been deploying Agentforce for the last 3 years or 2 years, and there's been a lot of noise in the market, like it's not working as we expected. But today they're demonstrating a complete redone of the agent force, and it's working beautiful. And he explained why it's working beautiful, because the agents were completely missing the context of your data. It is all about the context of the data. If you want to make AI work for you perfect, you need to get the data context perfectly done, and that's what we have been doing. That's our IP in our product and all the domain expertise that we bring in. So our AI is like we embed amazing amount of data context to what it is. And now when you ask any questions or you wanted to take any action, we can be like so precise what it can be done. Same thing that we're seeing that's happening in Agent Force as well.
Thank you. Yes, that was exciting. And this was a great conversation. We do have 15 minutes left, so I do want to open up the floor for any questions if people have any.
Yeah. Well, I was interested in this talk because of the focus on monetization. I was just curious, how would you recommend folks design pricing so revenue recognition doesn't kill innovation at implementation for those that are usually faced with pushback from their RevRec system? How should we be thinking about our pricing design?
Yeah. From my end, whenever I start thinking about pricing and packaging, as the product team is building the roadmap, we're having those parallel conversations on pricing and packaging, and I've got RevRec on speed dial, and because those are really the anchors. When I'm aligning the product team on what they're building, obviously with customers, this is what they want. I'm also talking to RevRec and making sure the systems are in place because it takes just as long to build a product as it is to make sure that our pricing strategy is solid and we're getting that feedback, and to make sure that we can operationalize this and actually send a bill out, do a quote, and do a RevRec. So all of those streams happen in parallel. I feel like that's a best practice from my end.
I mean, finance teams are always embedded in the new product introduction team, which handled the pricing and packaging as well. So it's not something new; it's always been there, but now it becomes more um, active. Like means you're because everybody's experimenting this pricing much more rapid than how it used to be, right? Like once you set the pricing model, it'll take years to change something. But nowadays, all these new companies are trying and testing so many different ones. So finance teams are always embedded into it. Typically, the finance team are kind of in the end of the process, but now we're seeing they're in the mainstream of the process, coming in and educating everybody. When you make these changes, what is the impact to your billing, your RevRec, and much more than that. So it needs to be the mainstream, not at the end stream of the process.
Yeah, I'll add one kind of war story to that. I've seen companies, they'll spend $1 million on researching their pricing and packaging, ready to launch a new pricing strategy, and ends up on the cutting room floor because they actually didn't think about the systems. So I always say pricing and packaging is 50% strategy, 50% operations, and making sure you have the systems in place. I've seen people say, we have customers that want to buy, we can't get a bill out, right? We can't do our RevRec. Okay, let's give up that revenue, right? That should never be the case.
In fact, the customer that I talk about who is heavily into the consumption business model, where they went putting the pricing at the service level, they knew they're going to come up with the pricing. They started their entire process 9 months before. It's like you have to educate the entire company about this new pricing. You're changing the entire processes. Your systems need to handle this. It's not just revenue, it's not just CPQ. Everything in between has to change, including your legal contracts. There's so much to be changed. So this customer really started the journey 9 months before to get everything because it's a real massive company. It takes a long time to get there. But then once they got there, all the systems in place and the processes in place, everything is running like super perfect now. Like they never got delayed into closing their books because of pricing issues. No customer was like feeling having bad experience that the pricing process is not working, they're not able to sell it properly. There's no issues. I think it needs a lot of planning and execution.
Yeah, on the pricing and strategy side, on the other anchor, when those systems are in place, that is music to my ears. We can really go as we interview customers and figure out how they want to buy and price and package, truly have that freedom. We don't have to think about the systems anymore. So if you think about the systems once and you build it right for that agility, you don't have to do an RFP every single time you want to reprice and package, which is how I've seen a lot of companies operate today. Other questions?
So it's my understanding that a lot of companies are moving towards consumption-based models. How does RevRec and CFOs, how do they do a consumption-based model without slowing the deal down?
Um, that's a big problem everybody's having today. One of the theme that we are seeing is it's not like they're taking an existing product and they're shifting into the consumption business model. Most of the companies are introducing a new product. They have this old pricing and packaging the way it's going on, but they introduce a new SKU in the product catalog where it's all consumption based. So it's kind of a parallel track they run and slowly kind of cut off the old one. But in this model, the best approach people have taken is they talk to the industry leaders today to understand how they're doing. We clearly see them, how others do it, and they try to adopt the model. But once again, like everybody is very unique in how they sell and package on their product line. The biggest shift, I mean, the shift is happening all throughout your business. Every team is getting impacted. Your sales comp is getting impacted big time. How you sell it to your customer is going to impact. Like it's not like you're selling pure consumption product at that point. You still might have some legacy products you're selling, and then on top of that, you're adding consumption products as well. So your entire code to revenue is shifting, and most of the companies are following the other industry leaders what they're doing. So that's what we see in the market. That's the best way to kickstart your process, learn from others, and they're going to guide even what are the systems that you need to change to get to the end goal that you need.
I'm going to answer this from a pricing and packaging point of view and really what customers want and what I'm seeing there. When I talk to a lot of CFOs, there's a bunch of things happening right now. One of them is people are trying to roll out their AI products and they're very expensive. There's a high COG. So you really want to think usage, consumption, a little bit of cost plus pricing to make sure you're covering your costs. Another thing that's happening out there is a lot of people have been buying these subscriptions. And we know right now with high tariffs, high inflation, every company's trying to cut their budget. Everyone's trying to do more with less. And what's happening is they're revisiting a lot of their SaaS contracts and they're saying, okay, you gave me an annual fee and I can use unlimited XYZ. Well, I'm not using one of these products in there. Can I get a discount? So they're really looking at their utilization with a fine tooth comb and saying, some of the stuff in this package I'm not using, give me a discount. There's some utilization I'm leaving on the table. So now companies are going back and saying, okay, well, do we give a discount? Do we package differently? Another thing happening is usage feels fair for an individual, right? Sometimes I pay for what I'm using. So I like a little bit of usage. I can flex up and down, especially for seasonal businesses. Then on the flip side, there's enterprises that say, well, with usage, that's unpredictable, right? When you get to these procurement teams at these big enterprises, they rather pay more for predictable spend. As a customer, I also want to know what my budget's going to be. So usage is coming in through many different ways when you think about usage, thinking about consumption from a customer point of view, from a budget point of view, from a, covering your COGS point of view. And, usage is something that's always been prevalent, in many, like in the telephony and the mobile world. And now it's really coming, especially with AI, consumption, usage. It's coming front and center again.
I think to add to that, there are two big challenges when somebody's moving into the consumption model too. One is, how are you going to start metering all the consumption data? That's a big challenge. Nobody thinks ahead of it, right? How are you going to capture all this data? Without that data, you're dead meat. You're not going to roll out your consumption, so you need that. And second is, how is the CFO going to get his revenue forecast into play? In a SaaS, it's very easy to forecast because you know what is your contract terms and you can easily figure out what is the future revenue you're going to get. But in a consumption model, you may have a contract term, but you have no idea what is the consumption going to be next month. So that's one area where we are using some of the AI models out there today to start doing revenue forecasting by looking at your historical data and then coming up with a pattern to show what could be your future revenue. Now, there's a lot of seasonality tied to it. The usage just like goes up and down the historically. Now, how do we apply that to a predictive model? So that's something that we are building today.
Yeah. One more thing too, and I tell this to a lot of the companies I work with, is you can have your same product line, right? Without doing any innovation on your product roadmap, if you think about different personas and segments you want to go after and have different pricing modules, you can increase your revenue. Without touching product, how do you think about how to price and package differently? And people are moving to consumption, especially as they move from a sales-led growth, SLG motion, to PLG, product-led growth. A lot of these people using something for the first time, they want to do usage. They're not sold on your product yet. They want to test it. But as they do that PLG motion, they're using it more. I want to commit more. I want volume discounts. Now I want to upgrade to more of an SLG type motion. So you're seeing a lot of companies that were big enterprises roll out PLG motions, PLG companies roll out SLG, and you really want that flexibility. And consumption can be a very powerful lever to really, charge price and package for the customer that you're going after and really increase and introduce all these new revenue streams that you've never had before.
So how do you temper that ability to innovate? If I think about the world of subscription, you can package up in different ways and you end up with this beautiful mess at the back where you've got one customer who's got a mix of new business, renewed business, new models, old models, and you've just got almost like this nuclear reaction going on in the back as the one contract splinters into 10,000 lines of RevRec. How do you actually deal?
So kind of a modeling, you're talking about a modeling system.
Yeah, modeling in terms of how you forecast, but also how you actually interface that effectively with an ERP so that you don't end up blasting those 10,000 lines of complexity at the customer level as well.
Yeah, I think that's where, first of all, it's a data modeling where you want to compare different models and see how they perform. That's number one. We allow you to input the data and model it in different ways you need. You basically add a lot more context to the data to do the modeling. And then when we're doing the actual RevRec, you're not blasting all the millions of data back into the ERP. You're basically summarizing everything to the meaningful way that you need it, and that's what you feed into ERP. ERP just becomes a ledger at that point, and not providing any more intelligence. You come back to RightRev to look into the more data mesh, right? So,
Yeah, but you bring up a good point, right? When we give ultimate flexibility in clean pricing and packaging to your end customer, the easier and more simple it is on the outside. You want to keep it that way for your customer. The more complex it is on the back end, and that's why you need the right systems and tools in place to really be able to ingest all that complexity and be agile enough to process all of it. You don't want to show, those old telephone bills where you had 10 different line items. You said, what is this? Right? I just want an all-you-can-eat plan with my cell phone. Right? We're kind of harkening back to those days around telephony and mobile bills.
do you allow your customer to configure as well on their own? Or you
the
configure?
sales reps who cause all the problems.
Yeah. So that's more dangerous.
And I know I like to say the sales reps cause the problems, but when we can give those different buying motions, that flexibility upstream, right? We've got to have the systems downstream. Kind of like, let's figure out the anchors. Ultimate flexibility to sales, but we can really build those guardrails in the system versus rely on deal desk all the time. Okay, well, we're at time. Thank you for coming, and we'll see you guys around Revenue Lounge.